Okay, it then continued. There was a Zircaloy 3 which was actually unsuccessful. I've recently seen the composition of that alloy. Somewhere I've got it now, but I haven't added it to the slide, and it's not really necessary because it's not really used. Zircaloy 4 was then the next iteration, and it's essentially, in simple terms, Zircaloy 2 without nickel. So you can see here small amounts of nickel. There's a bit of nickel in there. The nickel was taken out, and it's essentially a nickel-free variant of Zircaloy 2, and it reduces the hydrogen ingress in this material. Now, and that's important for pressurized water reactors. So there are two different, well, there are more than two, but the two main types of water-cooled, or actually there are two different types of light water reactors. There's a boiling water reactor and there's a pressurized water reactor. The boiling water reactor has the water is very high in oxygen content, so it's an oxidation environment. Whereas in the PWR you have a relatively high hydrogen content. So hydrogen pickup becomes an issue in PWRs, and it was found that nickel, it's actually it's generally the case that nickel is often it's an element which can act like a window for hydrogen to get into material. So, for instance, in nickel-based superalloys, nickel alloys can easily pick up hydrogen. However, in nickel-based superalloys, the hydrogen can't diffuse well, so that then limits maybe the hydrogen pickup. But in principle, hydrogen is very attracted to nickel. So that's why nickel was taken out for Zircaloy 4, and so it was possible to use this alloy then in PWRs. And it's now mainly used in nuclear submarines. So the nuclear submarines still use Zircaloy 4. It's a very old alloy. Civil nuclear reactors don't really use much of that alloy anymore, but the submarines still do. And why do they do? Well, they really find it difficult to change their material. They need to predict. So they usually, when you have these fuel assemblies which go into a reactor, you can take them out after a few years. Well, they tend to stay in a reactor for several years. But yeah, every now and then you have a shutdown, and if something goes wrong with your fuel assembly, you can take it out. In a submarine, it's really much more tricky because it's all kind of closed. It's designed that the fuel stays in there for 25 years, very long time. So if you now change your material and it goes wrong, you have a bit of a problem, because these submarines, they're quite a few billions of pounds. And the UK, for instance, the UK relies on these submarines from a deterrent point of view, and it's not many of them. If one goes down, there's a problem. So they are very conservative in their approach. Zircaloy 4 is probably not the best alloy these days, but they just find it difficult to have enough information data to make that step to a more modern alloy. But in the civil sector, so it's easier. And so today, what we find is that usually modern zirconium alloys used in PWRs, not so much in BWRs, but PWRs, so pressurized water reactors, they contain some niobium. And actually, to be fair, this was first thought of by the Russians, and then picked up by the Western world as well. So today's alloys, this one, which is called Zirlo, or a variant of this these days, with 1% niobium, tin and iron. And this is a Westinghouse product. So Westinghouse is a US, Swedish, small part UK company. M5 is a product by, well, now it's called Framatome again. It's a French company. And you can see that this is simply zirconium montes and niobium. What I would like to point out here is that when you think in terms of what we just discussed earlier for titanium alloys, we looked at massive amounts of alloy elements in here, right? Very different. Here, this is as well, apart from this one, which we just, I can talk about this in a minute. But you can see these are extremely dilute alloys. Why do you think? Why are these titanium alloys so heavily alloyed compared to zirconium alloys? What's the reason for that?
They need to be dilute or just maintain that neutral transparency.
No, it's not about the neutral transparency. Could be, yes, but it's actually not. What is the main driver here? What did I say earlier? What is the main? What was the main driver for? Corrosion. The strength is not the big driver here. Whereas in titanium, it's often the strength. And the only time when it's not the strength but corrosion, what did I say? CP titanium. So actually also something similar to this here. So I'm just trying to point this out to you, these kind of basic things to understand. Okay, so zirconium alloys are always very dilute because they are used for their corrosion performance and really corrosion performance only. And of course there are other aspects as well in the reactor. It's not only corrosion these days, but it still plays a very important role. Strength, yes, they need to be strong enough to sustain the fuel, but I mean, fuel assemblies are not rotating parts like in an air engine, so the stresses are much lower. The only case where actually we have a high strength variant is for the Canadian CANDU reactor, and that is a heavy water reactor which works with uranium fuel, which is actually not enriched. And there the pressure, they don't have a pressure vessel, but they have pressure tubes. And those pressure tubes are made from zirconium, and because, well, it's pressure, they need to sustain higher strength. And so the alloy used there is Zirc 2.5 niobium. But that's really the only alloy which is high strength. The Canadians have looked at some alloys to replace this, but actually they're still with that alloy, Zirc 2.5 niobium. And the Indians actually, they have a similar design. In fact, they nicked the design from the Canadians, and that's why the Canadians and the Indians didn't go on, still don't really get on with each other in the nuclear sector. So, so just a list here of the alloying elements and what they might or might not do. I should point out that to a large extent we don't always understand the exact role of these elements. They work, but why they work is often less clear than you might think. Tin. So I've already mentioned tin. It is actually, in zirconium, it's considered to be an alpha stabilizer, and in principle, it should also be the case for titanium. It mitigates nitrogen impurity issues. Although that has become less of an issue, because simply the zirconium today that is manufactured has much lower nitrogen content, and that's why something like this is possible now. Framatome producing an alloy which actually has no tin left in it, simply because the nitrogen contamination has been driven down very dramatically. but it increases the yield strength and creep resistance. So you need some strength in that material, and tin helps. However, it reduces corrosion resistance. It really does. There's been a lot of studies showing that tin accelerates corrosion, and that's why you find that Framatome has actually reduced tin. And even Westinghouse now, they have newer versions of this where they drive down the tin content for that reason. I think I have a little bit more about the corrosion. Well, I have more about this at next week, probably. Niobium, so it's a beta stabilizer. It stays in solid solution in beta but precipitates in alpha phase. Actually, that statement is not entirely correct. Niobium, I don't know why I've never noticed that mistake. Niobium has a limited solubility in alpha. Tin has relatively, high in terms of tin can be retained in solution in the alpha phase for the kind of amount of tin that is typically added. Niobium, there's a lot of discussion about how much niobium can really be dissolved in the alpha phase. Typically, people say up to 0.5 weight% of niobium, but actually, some of the work we've done more recently suggests it's much, much less. So it doesn't have much solubility in alpha phase, but it's a very sluggish alloying element. So the confusion probably comes from the fact that you might retain quite a bit of niobium in the alpha phase if you don't heat treat your material long enough. So it can retain in the alpha phase in a metastable way. It increases the yield strength. It also seems to help the creep properties, and it seems to help the corrosion resistance. But in what way, we don't really know. Well, there's some ideas, but it's still not very well established. Now, iron, chromium, nickel is again. These are beta stabilizers. These are these kind of eutectoroid beta stabilizers. They certainly, and probably a copy and paste error which I made here, they have hardly any solubility in the alpha phase. They really come out all the time. So they really form in zirconium, they really form precipitates, SPPs, second phase particles. For some reason, the zirconium community doesn't call it just precipitate, they always call it SPP. So if you read a paper, the zirconium paper, you might come across the word SPP. What they mean is just precipitates. And those additions, as you could see earlier in terms of zircon 2, seem to increase the corrosion resistance. And it's often said it comes through the formation of second phase particles. Now you might have actually learned in other lectures that precipitates are not very good for corrosion or oxidation. Like in aluminium alloys. Aluminium alloys, the precipitation strength in aluminium alloys don't have particularly good corrosion resistance or oxidation resistance, right? So it's not clear why in zirconium these SPPs help. It's really not clear. But it seems to work. But then it might also be worth keeping in mind that you cannot produce zirconium without some levels of iron and chromium in it. Iron and chromium is always there, even if it's only at the impurity level. But even the impurity level will already result in SPPs. I've never seen zirconium without SPPs, even when we try to produce pure zirconium. So it might be that you just make the precipitation more benign. I really don't know why it works. Nobody really I think, understands this. And there's still a lot of research done in this field. Oxygen, ligand titanium. I mean, to be honest with, also what I would like to point out, these things, they apply here to zirconium, but they're actually not quite similar to titanium. Titanium has a slightly higher solubility of iron, chromium, nickel than zirconium. We've already discussed oxygen content of titanium, and here again it's an alpha stabilizer, ligand titanium. It's solid solution. Well, it's solid solution, but interstitial, not substitutional, because it's a very small element, and increases the yield strength. And what one could add here, it reduces the ductility of the material. But you find the balance. And again, having zirconium without any oxygen is practically impossible. So you have some amount of oxygen in here. And you try to balance in terms of getting enough strength without reducing too much of the ductility of the material. So that's the principle. Here you have another list of typical chemical compositions. So here the two zirc alloys I've already mentioned. So you can see mainly the difference is here between the two in terms of nickel. Zerlo, now you have a niobium addition here. And then you can see the low tin Zerlo. That's what I mentioned earlier, where they actually drive down the tin content from close to 1% to around 0.7%. And in fact, there are new alloys Westinghouse is working on now, which have 0.3% tin, and they have better corrosion properties. And then you have Framatome, which has gone much more extreme in a way. They've just got rid of the tin and have the niobium content. They have some problems with the alloy. It doesn't seem to be a very robust alloy. Every now and then they seem to have a problem with it. So that it might be, I've seen that they're also now looking again at alloys where they add a little bit of tin to it. But why this alloy is less robust than this, maybe, it's completely unclear. There's so many unknowns still in this sector, it's quite unbelievable. Okay. So that's that. Okay, so actually, let's just start a little bit, but I don't want to go much further today. Actually, what we are going to do is then we're looking at next at the deformation mechanism of these materials. And that is very interesting, and it's very interesting from a zirconium and titanium perspective. So here I've drawn the HCP crystal and the FCC crystal. And both crystals are actually close packed. But deformation in HCP is fundamentally different from deformation in FCC, in the way that in HCP you have a number of slip planes. You don't just have one type. You have this one here, the 1O bar 1O, so the prismatic plane is a slip plane. And so what makes a slip plane actually? Close pack. Yeah, so close pack. No, it's okay. So, this is a relatively close packed plane, but the basal plane as well. So both of those planes can act as a slip plane. And then on top of that, you even have one going here diagonal, but that is much more difficult to activate because it's actually not that close packed, and the arrangement of the atoms in there is not particularly flat. It's a bit wavy. But you have all these different planes. Okay? But the direction of those slip in those planes is actually not very different. let's just look at this here. So here you can see a list of the typical slip modes in an HC, and that's true for titanium and zirconium. So you have slip on here, the prismatic plane and the basal plane, as you can see, but the slip direction is actually the same. There's also often argued that there's a third A-type. So this is called A-type slip because the Burgers vector is a pure A component. And you can see it's a pure A component because the last number here is 0. So the C, this is, A1, A2, A3, C. C is 0. So the Burgers vector has no C component here. So it's A-type slip. Here you can see it's 3, C, and we have A. So it's C plus A. This third one is often argued if it really exists or not. It might exist, but it's very, very rare. So really the main slip modes is 1 and 2, and then there's some 4 as well. Well, why do we see 4 quite not so much? Well, actually, we just discuss that later. The important point now is, which I would like to just point out to you, is the slip direction for this one, and these are the easy two here. They have the same slip direction, sorry. And so it's 1, 1 bar 2, 0. So it's shown here. So you can see how this basal plane actually slips along this direction, or any of the variant of that. And that plane, which is perpendicular to the basal plane, slips in the same direction. And that is, to some extent, the issue in HCP. So the slip direction of the two easy slip modes is actually the same and has no C component. The slip mode which has a C component is this one, C plus A slip, but as you can see here, this is the critical resolved shear stress as a function of temperature, and this is for titanium in this case. You can see that the critical resolved shear stress, so the ease of activating the slip, is much more difficult for C plus A up here compared to basal or prismatic. They're close together. But this one is, when you calculate the ratio, is somewhere between 2.5 to 6, 7 times more difficult to activate, depending on the temperature. So this is very, very different from AFCC. So it is difficult to shear that crystal in all sorts of different directions, right? In FCC, your slip plane is 1, 1, 1. It's only one type, but actually think about all the different directions you can have 1, 1, 1 planes in that cubic cell. And then the planes are 1, 1, 0. And there are 3 1, 1, 0s here. Okay, you can reconstruct one by bringing these two, adding these two. But actually there you can really shear an FCC crystal in all sorts of different ways just by having 1, 1, 1 planes and 1, 1, 0 directions. What I'm trying to say here is that if you only consider the easy slip planes, basal and prismatic, you actually have not many ways of shearing that crystal. So I'm going to stop here now. Thanks for your attention. Thanks for allowing me to lecture through without a break. Next time we'll have a break again. And think about this a little bit. We will discuss that again in more detail next time we meet. Thank you.
So Bruce, I remember the first calculation is only this one. It's only 0, 0.
No, that's not true.
Doesn't?
No.
So you mean this or this? So
Yeah, it depends. You can't say so. This is the case for titanium and zirconium. In some methods which have an HCP crystal structure, you are correct, but it depends on the C over A ratio.
Oh yes, yes. Yeah.
Remember?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks.
Sorry, say again. Oh, with us. Ah, you are the person. Oh, yeah, good. Yes. Sorry, I'm in a rush because I need to go and see a doctor.
I just wonder if I need to prepare for the analyze or do I need to perform the
We would do the hipping in Sheffield. Or at Birmingham. We don't have a hip here. But we work with other universities then. Sorry? You would manage it, but you wouldn't. Yeah, you would work with other people to do that. The powder we buy. Could be aerospace application or biomedical application. Could be anything. Probably not to be. No, it's not so much. We probably want to produce more complex alloys because some of these titanium alloys are very difficult to manufacture because the alloying elements they separate easily. But if you do it through hipping, it might be easier because it's a solid state process. So you don't have a liquid phase, so it's much easier. Sure.
这个是这样啊，绿色的是这个，绿色的。然后，但是那个刚刚看过，它绿色是它绿色的，绿色是蓝色的，绿色不是。
Words to live by.
That's going to come up on the podcast.
This is Lucy Denora.
You're gonna just start saying something about ASMR. Welcome to my ASMR.
然后绿色跟水差不多吧。
怎么会有那么细？
其实我当时没太清楚，它 sleep direction 不一样吧？因为那个3是纯 A 嘛，它是182练，但是 C 加 A 就是183。它这里有一个
plan 一样，但是 direction。
它也累也不一样，累也不一样。它那个 total 到底是怎么能 total 的？
我就不知道，我就不知道这个。
我感觉那个什么burger 的那个没听懂。对，它到底是指的 burger 它不含 C 向量，还是指对只是前3个不含 C 向量？哦，
这课好难，好难。
而且这个课自己都写对吧？
对的。
天哪，
他都不写在 PPT 上。
他每一个都要理解，每一个都要理解，他每一个都不写。哎，
我都觉得没有去全知道他说。
日本人好容易混淆。
对的。你这个太随意了。
这觉得不让那个老师上课更随意。I don't know. I don't know. 因为这个确实，因为如果合并元素添加确实也不好解释，就是感觉好像它就是添进去就产生了这样的结果，那你能解就是好像有些就是并不能解释它为什么是这样。
通过实践。
对，实践
经验。
不是啊，它不是好多都是根据什么 diffusion 啊那些的。有些是可以解释，他只说了一个不能解释的那个，他就说那个，他就说那个铁的那个铁工业的那个铁镍镉还是什么那个，他说那个好像无法解释其他的。啊，对，我想起来了，中间有一点。他说那几个元素会对它造成但是它对铝来说不行，但是对那个对那个可以。我也印象。然后他说我也不知道为什么，反正就是这样子。你到时候给我发一下那一页吧。我发不了那一页，我把整个发给你好吗？那要不你截个图吧，你把那张截一下图，以图片形式吧。我是在那个，我现在发给你吧。按脚步一下。没一个课是神奇的。
太难了，太难了，这个太难了。
是这样吗？就是